better things than having a bunch of diagonals for mowing the lawn on a Sunday morning. Like clear diagonals.
Yeah, you did good.
Yep, that's what I'm all about on a Sunday morning. So welcome to While She's Napping. I am Adam.
And I'm Cindy.
And it is Sunday afternoon, the 31st of May. And 2020, a very long year so far.
Mm-hmm.
And we're only approaching halfway.
Yep. It feels like it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
2020.
There's a meme saying that it's been an entire Tool song.
Yeah. Accurate.
I mean, whatever.
Yep.
So, hey, got a good amount of feedback on the MLM episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently it's a topic that fascinates a lot of people. And I think that's probably related to some of the things we pointed out about the similarities to cults and stuff like that. I think a lot of our friends that are also true crime junkies find this type of content fascinating. So, yeah, we were glad that we found a topic that resonated with people.
We appreciate the feedback. We appreciate the downloads. There have been a lot more people tuning in, and I don't know if it's because the subject matter that we have been talking about previously, like it's sort of broad. It's sort of like we're not sticking to one particular thing. I know when we started this, we thought we were going to gear towards just, our lives as parents, but apparently that sort of took a left-hand turn.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things we're talking about have some link to parenting in one way or another.
Sure.
And yeah, we may highlight that in some cases more than others, but yeah, I think it's good to have a variety.
Well, if you stumbled upon this in a random fashion and you enjoy what you're hearing, leave us 5 stars and a quick review on Apple Podcasts. And if you don't have Apple Podcasts, you're listening to this on some other platform, we invite you to subscribe, and we hope you do. We hope you stick around for the long haul because we're kind of just winging it every week. Like
pretty much.
Kind of like a think piece every
kind of
week.
Like parenting.
Yeah. It's a think piece podcast every week. This episode we'll be talking about the divide between the baby boomers and the millennials. So if this interests you, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're sticking with us. And hopefully the topics henceforth or previously are of some interest to you. So we invite you to dig through the archives if you're new and just listen to what we produce. Listen to the topics. They interest us and hopefully they interest you. So, subscribe, leave a review, all that good stuff. Before we start, though, you wanted to touch on what is happening. And it's funny because while doing some sort of research on the topic today, it's weird. So I listened to a bunch of lesser known podcasts
that touch on the generational stuff.
To prepare for today. And one of the ones I listened to, the first thing the person said was, there's a lot of shit going on when it comes to the protests and the riots. And I'm like, oh, this is a new episode and it's a podcast that's covering the same subject matter that we're going to today around the same time. I look at the date, it's from 2018. And I'm like, what? Like, so it's like these protests and these... I at that time, honestly, I don't even remember what the protest is about because these sort of social issues have become so ubiquitous throughout, like, what, I don't know.
Well, they haven't become it. They've always been.
They've just been ever present. And now it just seems to be continuously heightening and for better or for worse, depending on how you want to look at it. In terms of an awareness factor, I think it is for better.
For us.
So why don't you just take the floor? You wanted to talk. You don't have to be nervous about it.
I am. It's uncomfortable. And I think it is for a lot of people who are in our position of privilege. And it's not something that we have had to face in our day-to-day like other people have. And I don't know why this particular issue or this particular incident seems to be bringing this issue up more intensely than I mean, it has before, but for some reason this time feels different. And of course, we're referring to the murder of George Floyd that happened last week. And maybe it's the state of emotion and vulnerability that people are in due to the pandemic is like compounding things. I don't really know. But I thought that while I don't think we're in a position to take a deep dive or go on and talk about this between us and to all of you, but I felt like it would just be plain wrong if we didn't acknowledge it at all. And so with going back and forth, just between you and I, we've been talking about how we wanted to approach this. And I think where I've landed, and we haven't even talked about what this conclusion was, but I think the best thing that we can do right now as two white people with that privilege, and then also the privilege of having this platform, even if it's not, super wide reaching or anything, we do have a platform. And so we have to say something. But, we've had the microphone for a long time, metaphorically. And I think the best thing that we can do is to sit back and listen and try to educate, and then take action where it makes sense. So that's kind of where I'm at with this right now. I don't want us to go on and on about it because we're not the people who need to be heard right now. So
let me interject. So I'm in a difficult position, and this is not to say that. So even about to say what I'm about to say makes it seem like, if you hear it, and if you are like me, if you're listening and you are African American or you are non-white, what I'm about to say, I fully anticipate the response of, the fuck, buddy? Like, seriously? But like, I understand that as a 34-year-old white male, like, anything I say has, like, it can be a meme in a way. Like, it's just like, yeah, what does this guy know what he's talking about? He doesn't know anything. And it's true. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, I am in a position where I have like the ultimate sociological like lottery. I've hit it because I'm a 34-year-old white male in America.
Straight, cis, white male. Yeah.
So I'm aware of that. I could never, ever, ever understand what it's like. And for me I can say all the right things. I can say like, this is terrible, because it is. I can say,
well, you're never going to say all the right things, and that's
sorry, the PC right things. Like, sure. I feel like I'm on the quote unquote right side of things, where I'm looking at it and I'm saying this is terrible.
Right.
What happened. And when it comes to racial inequality, I can speak about how it's terrible and disgusting, but I can never say I understand what it's like, because I don't.
And that's why I landed in the spot where I am, where I don't think it's going to be super productive for us to talk about it anymore. I think there are voices out there who can do it in a much better, more effective, articulate, educated way. So I think the best thing that we can do to be better allies is to try to learn as much as we can, take the responsibility on ourselves to learn, and then take action wherever we can. So I think what I would like to do over the next week is try to compile some of the resources and different books, articles, people to follow on social media, and also the different organizations or fundraising campaigns that you can contribute to if you'd like to do that. And so I think I'm going to try to compile some of that and post it on the While She's Napping page. And I think that is probably where I could see us fitting into this conversation right now.
Well, it's also should be noted that, like, I see a lot of people comment, like, I'm pretty active on Twitter. And, if you want to follow me on Twitter, my personal, it's at Adam Corsair, and like my full name is there. So like I put myself in a position of like social vulnerabilities by having my full name, but like I'm ready to stand behind this. But from what I've been seeing is that a lot of people are complaining about the manner in which people are responding to this, that being like riots and protests and whatnot. And funny enough, you probably didn't even see this because you were sleeping last night, but I decided to take the leap and post on Facebook. And I said, if you see a black person or any person get murdered and you don't have the knee-jerk reaction to say something, but you see buildings being burnt down and people protesting and you have the knee-jerk reaction to say something, you should probably fucking ask yourself why. You should probably ask yourself why that is.
And that,
because if you're more outraged over cities and buildings burning than a human being getting killed for no reason, unarmed,
and not just one, over and over.
I know, but this is what launched it. Like, no threat to the 4 police officers around him and 1 on him. If that doesn't enrage you to the same degree as seeing buildings burn down, there's a lack of humanity there, I think.
Right. And that's where I feel like I don't even know if I can, I'm getting emotional talking about it.
Like, I don't want to,
because that's what I'm seeing too on social media between acquaintances, friends, family. There are certain individuals who I'm, not super surprised that they're posting things like that.
Well, I put it down because then it became a meme. It became like an argument platform.
And that's right. So that's where I feel like sometimes, that's why I think we should use this platform to the best of our ability. This is our content. We can choose what to put. And, and I think by directing it, the content towards the people who, or the resources that can really do the best job of educating and calling people to action is the way to go. Because as tempting as it is for me to respond to some of those things on social media and everything, I just feel like it's never productive, and it's not, we are not the voices that people need to listen to.
Well, that
because of what you're describing.
Right. It becomes a meme.
Yeah.
And look, if you don't like the position that we are taking, no matter what, side, quote unquote, you are or where you land on this, you can unsubscribe. You can stop listening to us now. I don't care. But if you would like to respond, I am looking forward to hearing your podcast. And if you don't have a podcast, I'm not going to listen to you on Facebook. So, like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to, I made the mistake of posting a Facebook status. It was stupid. Like, that in and of itself, the moment I hit it, I'm like, it's going to appear just as another disingenuous status.
That's what it's like. We feel like we have to do something,
right?
But everything feels so inconsequential, like that, like posting on Facebook or whatever. So I feel like there's like this balance of like, you want to do something, you can't do nothing, which is where we ended up discussing how we wanted to approach it here on the podcast. And I feel like there's different levels. There's like the people who are posting the stuff, like complaining about the riots. That's like one extreme. And then there's the people who are just not posting anything because they don't know what to say or do.
Right.
And then there's people who are posting things, trying to be supportive and trying to acknowledge it. And it's like those are the different levels of and then there's the people who are actually like doing something and being an active ally. And that's where I want to try to get to. And encourage everyone to do the same. And so if you have other ideas for how we can go about this in a productive way, we are more than happy to hear that. If you have resources, if you have books or whatever, one thing I did read that I thought was a really great idea was if there are certain resources you have and you are willing to share them with your friends and family, to do sort of a book exchange rather than purchasing new copies through Amazon or whatever, and then instead using the funds that you saved on not buying the book to donate to a cause that you feel drawn to. So
these aren't easy conversations to have.
They're not. And so we're trying to open up the conversation and be proactive and be an ally, but it is not easy. And look, we will say the wrong thing. I know that, but I didn't want to say nothing.
Look, and, for all the people getting pissed off about other individuals knocking the protests and those people saying, like, why don't these people just stay home and listen to the cops? If they just listened to the cops, they wouldn't get hurt. Are the same fucking people that were bitching about not getting a haircut and standing up to people at City Hall or the State House.
And complaining about Colin Kaepernick peacefully.
It's the same people. So, I automatically am just like, when it comes to you, in your quote unquote inequities of not getting some sort of vanity treatment of a haircut or your nails done, it's the end of the world because it disrupts your world slightly. The thing is that this individual's family's world is disrupted completely because of something unnecessary. Right. Mm-hmm. So when you have people standing up for this cause, I'm saying the death was unnecessary. That was an unnecessary death. of George Floyd. So like
of course.
the point is that if you're gonna bitch about people's response to this angrily, like in a very angry way, I don't know. Like I just, how can you not look at that and say, yeah, I get it. Like for me personally, I don't think I would do that, but that's me and I understand. I would never tell someone that you shouldn't be doing that, and I understand why it's done. You understand? Like that, even that I'm trepidatious to say, but like I again, I am not in the position, and I can't imagine how that would make that individual feel, or that family feel.
It's not even the family, it's everyone in the Black community.
It should be everybody.
No, I'm saying who's impacted on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all. Like, I don't want to belabor the point even more. We're 50 minutes in, but
yeah, I know we said we weren't going to go too deep into it, but it's a very emotional situation, and it's even more so for other people who are not like us, and I can't imagine how everyone in that community is feeling. So we couldn't say nothing. We are trying really hard to do the right thing and approach it the right way, and we are open to feedback and ideas.
So today's topic sort of tiptoes around the same line. Like there is some cross-pollination. It's not completely in the deep end, but there is some cross-pollination on the two circle graphs here. So let's talk about the divide between the millennials and the boomers. Like everybody sees it out there, the okay boomer response, or the millennials are just lazy and entitled with the avocado toast. It's out there. So again, I'm a 34-year-old American male. Cindy is a 32-year-old American female. We are within the millennial landscape. So again, being a millennial does not mean you were born in 2000 or after that. Being a millennial is when your coming of age was during that period. So like a quick Wikipedia search is if you were born between 1981 and 1996. It's probably a little bit before then, like maybe the earlier.
I found 77 to 95.
Sure, like
so
if you were
a little wiggle room. Yeah.
If you were in that time period, you are a millennial. So like when people around my age, like 36, 37-year-olds, or even people my age, are like fucking millennials, I'm like, you are a millennial.
Well, that, and I think a lot of times, just anyone who's younger, like anyone like under 30,
yeah,
is
millennials
still
aren't 19 anymore.
Right, exactly. Like anyone who's in a teenager, 20s, whatever, are viewed as millennials, and everyone's being lumped together. But there are other generations after millennials, yes. People who have been born since.
So millennials are also known as the Gen Ys, right?
Yep.
So like, but obviously the millennial the terminology has become more highlighted, and it's easier to identify. Whereas the baby boomers are those that are after, I think, the silent generation. Correct. I want to say, and they're the
traditionalist or silent generation.
Yeah, the
before
46 to 64. If you were born within that time period, you are a baby boomer. Yep. The baby boomer, I think, was a result of like the post-war boom of World War II.
Right, of the soldiers returning.
Right there. So, I think though that the millennials today, and again, this isn't like a numbers game here or a war, but I do think the amount of millennials have now outnumbered, or there are more millennials now than baby boomers.
That makes sense.
Yeah, just because of like humanity's timeline,
population growth.
What we're doing.
Yeah.
So you see it all the time. You see a lot of dysfunction or axis to grind when it comes to the millennials and the baby boomers, and it seems like that is at the forefront more than any other period against period conflict. I don't know that is necessarily unique when it comes to generations. I am willing to bet that maybe the silent generation about the baby boomers was like, these fucking kids with their Beatles and shit. Like I can see that.
No, I definitely think that it happens to every generation. I think we've viewed or been more aware of the millennial boomer divide. Comparison or divide because we are in it. We fall into one of those categories, and our parents fall into the baby boomer category. So we witness it on a firsthand basis, but also with social media, I think it's allowed for things to trend,
but I
and
do
have it be
think
more visible.
There's more of a, not continuity. I think there's more similarity between the millennials and Generation Z, which is the generation that came after us and that are now like in their teens or 20s, compared to the millennials and baby boomers, right? Or there's a Gen X after the baby boomers, but I feel like that they were so quick.
Well, so I found it's all the current generations that, people who could be living today, were the traditionalists or the silent generation, which was is anyone born before 1945.
Yeah.
Yep. Boomers 1946, born between 1946 and 1964. Gen X is born between 1965 and 1973.
That's such a short period of time. We're
Yeah,
talking
that's true.
an 8-year
That one
period.
is a little shorter. Right.
How
The
can
millennial,
you define that?
the millennial period is almost twice as long.
That's what I'm saying.
77 to 95.
Same thing with the baby boomer. So I feel like that Gen X, like it's probably depending on what side of that you were born on. Like if you were born on the later side of Gen X, you probably lean millennial, and the opposite. You probably lean baby boomer. You know what I'm saying?
That makes sense.
I don't even.
Gen
no disrespect
Z,
to no disrespect to Gen X. I just don't even want to.
It's not super. It doesn't really ever fall into these like controversial or like.
There's no distinct characteristics about Gen X.
Well, I think there probably are, but I just don't think that they're very. They're not really highlighted, and like you said, there's not like a divide between Gen X and another. Maybe there. I don't know. Maybe there will be with the Gen Z, but
okay, sure, yeah.
And because that's anyone born since 1996, so that's also a really long.
Yeah, my point in bringing this up, though, I do think there's more similarities from millennials to Gen Z than millennials to baby boomers.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yep, and I think that's a function of the how fast technology has started to advance since about the millennial age.
Well, let's start there then. So I do feel like the main acts. So what I want to do is focus on, to start, what sort of axe to grind that the baby boomers have over the millennials. And I think it's because that they see millennials and they assume that they are lazy, entitled, participation trophy receivers, and they just think that the world is available to them. I don't get that sense. I don't get that sense about anyone really in our generation as millennials. But then again, like I have an inherent bias because I am that. But if anything that we feel entitled to, I think it's the same type of opportunities and the richness of those opportunities that the baby boomers were given. Like when we talk about things like the availability of the job market or college affordability and whatnot, those things are like in stark contrast between each other in those generations, right? So the baby boomers at the time that they were going to college would be like, I was able to do it on a waitress salary. Can't fucking do that now as a millennial. And I think there's like some sort of disconnect or misunderstanding between that, because the baby boomers will say, well, I was able to do it and you should too, figure it out. Right. And the millennials are like, how the fuck can I figure it out? Like, I can't afford to live that way. No one can.
Right. It's like the pull up your bootstraps argument of if you try hard enough, you can do it. And that's not true and at different levels too. Even within the millennial generation, there are some people who have things more available to them than others, and it's not the same world. And it's like I feel like in the time of the baby boomers, it was like, you go to, a lot of people didn't even go to college. You could just get a job right out of high school, and the trades, I think, were more like
opportunistic.
Yeah, like that was a path that was taken almost equally, if not more, than going to college, probably. I mean, I'm just kind of speculating. I don't know that for sure, but making that assumption. And if you did go to college, it didn't put you in 6-figure debt for 30 years of your life,
without really having the job prospects to necessarily
pay that even
off.
With all that debt and with your degree, it's hard to find a job for a lot of people. So yeah, I feel like I also just wanted to go back really quick and say we are pointing out the stereotypes that we have seen.
Correct,
We're not saying that, we think all boomers think this about all millennials or all millennials think this about all baby boomers. We're just like cherry picking some of the stereotypes that have gone on, spread on social media and stuff like that. So just wanted to give that disclaimer too.
So when it comes to the whole pull up your bootstraps mentality, I feel that there is an inherent contradiction or some sort of like hypocrisy when the baby boomers talk about their time and how they got through difficulties or they got through their hardships that doesn't necessarily apply to millennials, much like we were talking about, like paying for college tuition. Obviously, there are more matters that are more severe than just, paying for college tuition, which is a big deal. But, in terms of like, oh, I didn't have this technology when I was your age and I got by. Oh, we didn't have the internet to have to, get information at our fingertips. We could just look stuff up. Oh, we didn't have, GPS, so we had to look at a map and follow a map, learn how to read a map. Oh, we had to learn calligraphy or cursive or whatever. And you guys with your computers and typing, like you don't know how good you have it. It seems like there's like a need to be acknowledged. Right. And the baby boomers talk about the millennials being like, you are such pussies. Like all you want to do is like cry about things. But at the same time, they're like, hey, look at the cool shit that we did. And I'm just like, dude, I'm sorry I was born in a time where convenience is a thing. Like convenience is now like marketable.
Right.
Like, what am I supposed to do? Not use these technologies? Okay, you first.
Right.
Like, you don't use it first and go back and we'll see how easy it is.
Right. And that's one of the things I feel like that the whole technology thing is one thing that is very visible between the difference between the two generations. Millennials are just generally more comfortable with technology, even if it's a piece of technology that, we're not as super familiar with or trained in or whatever when you're thinking about more. Right. It's easier to pick it up because it's very similar. We pretty much grew up with it. Well, to some extent, I feel like
when you're in your coming of age of your adolescence, that's when you really like. For our daughter right now, isn't learning. She is to a degree, but if we hand her two radically different devices, she probably wouldn't know how to figure them out. Like for instance, if we gave her like an electric book, she'd be like, "Oh, I know how to turn pages on a book." But if we give her a Kindle, she'd be like, "What am I doing?" Like,
maybe, but she would know how to if it's a touch screen or not, and she would know how to
swipe
it. She would do all.
Like, but
that's what I mean. But like, and even like things like having an Alexa, like that's not a foreign concept, but that's a very new technology to someone in the baby boomer generation, like to even wrap your head around, like. Right. I just talk to this device and it plays my music or what. Like it takes some getting used to. It's just very, very different. But for her, that's just going to be second nature. Like she's going to be confused if she's in a room and she says Alexa and nothing happens.
or whatever it is. Right. Yeah. Some sort of smart device.
Right. Exactly. So I think that they're acknowledging that that's just the way things have happened, that technology has just sped up a lot in the span of the millennial generation. And that's why millennials are better with technology, because we've grown up with it and it's just an integrated part of our lives. And we, for the most part, it's being used for positive things. Like you said, like that everyone uses in every generation for the most part.
Yeah. It's like obviously the boomers aren't the first ones to have cars. I don't want to, put that out there, but think about the generation that like was introduced to cars and that youth system that was brought up with cars in their lives compared to the previous generation that had to walk places. It's kind of like that generation be like, back in my day, I had to walk everywhere. Everyone had to walk. How dare you? And I'm just like, what do you want me to do? Like not use a car? Like just because you had to walk? And it's kind of the same thing. Like because you had to use a map, because you had to use the encyclopedia to look shit up and go to a library, I cannot utilize the luxuries that are before me. That is the internet. That makes no sense.
I think part of that, and I even as a millennial, someone in my early 30s, I even feel that whole like, oh, kids these days thing. Like, even though I'm still a young adult, like I still feel that to some extent. And when I hear, like, I can put myself in that position where it's more of just like, I don't know if it's like a nostalgic thing or if it's just like having to adapt to how much things have changed within a course of a lifetime. Like, it's almost like, well, I remember the days that I would walk to the library and look up something in the encyclopedia, and I had to like really try to like get this information or whatever.
We are the last generation to have to do that.
Right. I know. So like I can kind of see it, but my issue is when it becomes an insult.
Or when we like, I can understand the value of those things, but I can also acknowledge that this is like an antiquated way of doing research. Like,
right. It's losing its value over time.
It's kind of like implicitly they're saying, beware of the zombie apocalypse where the internet and electricity are gone because you're going to want to use these skills, when that is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, but I do think there are some skills. We were talking about this the other day, like some basics, like being able to read a map or like have some sense of direction.
But you don't need
is
to
a
know
decent
how to
skill
read
to
a map.
have. No, for the most part. But like if you do end up in a situation where your phone dies and you're in an unfamiliar area and you have no idea how to get home or even get to a gas station or whatever to ask someone for directions.
You will always find a gas station.
Which
just
you
drive
don't even
straight.
like asking for directions.
Just drive
stereotype.
straight.
I guess. I'm just saying, like, it's not a bad thing to know how to do.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it becomes like sort of condescending when the generation is like before us is like, we had to do all this stuff. And I'm just like, I'm sorry I was arbitrarily born now when I was. And like,
well, that's what I was saying about like the issue is when it becomes an insult. It's just there are some things that some generations are better at than others. And it's just a product of when you grew up and what was available to you at the time and what skills were more valuable at those different points in time. Like, that's just natural. You're going to be better at the things that serve you most than the things that don't, you know?
I think technology is like the biggest axe to grind, and I keep using that term, like axe to grind. But like I think that is the biggest thing that caused the division between millennials and boomers. I don't necessarily think I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the stereotypical personality traits of like being entitled and whatnot that millennials supposedly had. We'll talk about that in a minute. But when it comes to technology, it's just like, you know, there's this automatic, you know, knee-jerk, hey, like, fuck you millennials and your technologies. But like I sort of touched on it already, they enjoy the same technologies and the same luxuries. And it's kind of like, even though I was just saying how they want to be acknowledged with all the cool shit and like sort of rudimentary compared to today shit that they did at their age, I kind of want, as a millennial, my generation, I feel like we should be like, hey, you're welcome. Do you see your iPhone? You're welcome. Do you see your Android? You're welcome. That's us. That's the millennials that made this possible.
Yeah. Both, all the generations have something to learn from the other ones. Like the older generations should or could teach us how to do some of those basic hands-on life skills that maybe we don't know as well because we can just look it up on YouTube and like we don't need to learn, or like we just put it in our GPS and we don't need to know how to read a map or anything like that. So I think both generations have things they can learn from the other, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that the generations are different. And it doesn't, like, I feel like the okay boomer thing, I know that came from a specific instance, a specific situation, and that ended up trending. But I feel like when you start to use the generations as an insult, it's the same thing as like, oh, millennials. Like, I feel like it's not just the definition of what generation you're from, it's an insult in and of itself. Like the word millennial, I feel like can and is often sometimes used as an insult. And that I just find that weird.
That's definitely a millennial response.
What?
Like, I'm offended.
I'm not saying I'm offended. I said it. I started with okay boomer.
No,
it's the same thing.
I know.
It was using the generation as an insult, and even though, you know, there is some I want to say merit, but like we were talking about stereotypes, but there is something to it. Like there's a seed of truth as to where it comes from. Yeah, you know.
But you know, when it comes, we'll stick on the line of being offended and whatnot. Like I know that is highlighted when it comes to millennials and like, you know, everybody has to be offended over something. And to me, like that does get a little bit out of hand. Like there are some things like when we talked about doing this podcast, for instance, I said to you, like, you can't worry about offending people because you just will. Like, even if you mean it in the most like harmless, innocuous way, there's going to be something you say that's going to offend someone. Like, for instance, like I just did the South of the Six podcast, and Connor and I were talking about like the NBA playoff brackets, and we didn't like one of the proposed playoff brackets, and we expressed that, and we expressed more of a attraction towards another one. I'm speaking very loosely and generally here, but someone responded to us and be like, you guys don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is so stupid. It's about the money. And I'm just like, I can't please everyone, dude.
Of course not. Yeah.
Like, again, my initial response is, I anticipate listening to your podcast about it when this person doesn't have one. So I'm just like, please, like, you know, you don't have to take the opportunity to just like spill the tea on that. Like, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, you're going to offend everyone or someone about something, and that to me is like a product of the millennial generation. But when you break it down into its intricacies, like mental health awareness is now a thing, and more of a focus on like psychological, I don't want to say impairments, but psychological awareness of things is a product of the millennial generation that wasn't necessarily there in the baby boomer generation. I know it like started like especially after like the Vietnam War with PTSD, but at that time when soldiers were coming home, it wasn't diagnosed as PTSD. It was only in hindsight that they realized it's PTSD. You know what I'm saying? So like now we're more aware of like the after effects of a soldier in war and whatnot.
Right. Well, it was just addressing mental health in general was kind of more taboo. It was like a private thing. Like people didn't really talk about it openly.
So my point now is that things that could be considered like normal mental health issues, and I put normal in air quotes, they're not something to be like, you know, messed with. Baby boomers might respond to that and be like, you guys are too sensitive, like pick it the fuck up and let's go. And like same thing with like participation trophies. First of all, in my generation, I never once got a participation trophy ever. And if there are millennials that did, we didn't fucking ask for them. you guys, you boomers gave them to us. Like, what do you want us to do?
Well, I think maybe
say no to
I
this
think they're
trophy?
referring to maybe millennials as parents now expecting all of their
But,
kids
it's
to
like,
get participation
what is this,
trophies.
a test? When I was a kid, like, this kid's not going on the right path if he accepts this trophy. No, like I'm going to take the trophy. I never got one. I'm just saying, like, these things I feel like are a little over embellished from the boomer generation describing the millennials. And don't get me wrong.
And vice versa, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some things that are over embellished on our end. But when it comes to things like being sensitive or like, you know, technology and having that axe to grind, those are my two biggest gripes. It's like, no, it's more of an awareness towards things that kind of matter in terms of a mental health. And like, hey, we're not the ones sending hundreds of $1,000s to Prince Alibaba over in South Africa like you guys are and getting like bit on that stuff. And we're not the one answering the phone calls from people from India saying they're the IRS and you give them your information. Like, to me, there's that kind of divide where it's like, somehow this is our fault.
What is our fault?
Like those types of things, like mental health awareness. Oh, that's a millennial thing. They're sensitive. They should just like get the fuck over it. Oh, like the IRS is calling me. I was scammed. Oh, fucking millennials and their internet scams. Like, no, like you guys were the one that fell for it. You guys are the ones that like they target for a reason.
Well, it comes down to the whole technology thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's all. Like, I for the life of me, like, I know I sound like such a fucking millennial right now. Like, this whole platform that we're dealing with as a podcast is so millennial. I get it. But, like, again, when we have these avenues or these opportunities that are there for us to take, I understand that these opportunities weren't really available for the baby boomers. Like, podcasting is such, like, I don't want to say a foreign concept, but the closest thing that we can relate to a podcast to those that are in the boomer generation is like a radio show. Like when my mom was like, what station is on? How do I get it? It's not a radio show, but it kind of is. Like, you know, and not everybody in the boomer generation could have a radio show.
Right. Yeah.
Or a television show on YouTube or something, like, you know?
Yeah. And I think that contributes to some of the things we've been observing with social media and misinformation stuff that we touched on in the climate change episode and the pandemic episode. And not that millennials or any of the younger generations are immune to like falling for sharing misinformation and not recognizing invalid sources. But I do think that it is more likely for the older generations to fall for those types of false stories or misinformation because and this is just me totally speculating again, I think the older generations, it was like news was news. You watched the news or you listened to the radio or you read the newspaper, and that is where you got your news. And
like
it was
the
just
newspaper and
right.
stuff.
It was like a limited number of resources limited number of news outlets, and you could take that at face value. This is the news. This is what is happening today. Now there are so many sources of information, and not anyone could put that out there. Like, you're getting it from a newspaper. I mean, those are journalists, writers, editors, like a valid, even though there was some propaganda still,
especially leading into like World War II and stuff.
Right.
Like
not saying that it didn't exist, but I'm saying it was more difficult to put it out there. Now
there's no way you could have cross-referenced.
Right. Like, but nobody can put anything they want on the internet or on social media now and make it look legitimate and share it and make it go viral. And it's like, you can't take the news, right? You can't take it at face value anymore. You have to view everything through the lens of, is this real? Is this valid? Does this have, sources to back it up? And you can't just take it like you could when it was just the newspaper giving you your news. So I feel like that's a shift in how we receive information that the generations before millennials didn't necessarily have to grapple with on a day-to-day basis like we do. Yeah,
there was no reason, or even if there was a reason, you were certainly unaware of the reason to cross-reference when you only had like 3 or 4 news sources, right? Like, it was the newspaper. I don't even think definitely wasn't. 24-hour news cycle wasn't even available back then. Like, I think CNN was the first one.
Yeah, I don't know.
In like the 80s or 90s. I know Ted Turner started that, but like what you had received in your newspaper or your, I wouldn't even say magazine, but whatever, like your local news, that was it. Like, you had to trust that. There's no cross-reference. Whereas now there are plenty of people that are fact-checking shit. There are plenty of people that are cross-referencing stuff and saying like, no, this is not quite right. This is actually propaganda. Like, this is so left or right leaning that it's like skewing the truth just a little bit, using specific terminology and buzzwords to really activate the brain waves in a certain individual to either get them pissed off or it's sympathetic. Like, there are a lot of things that are at play here with the internet age that I do feel like the millennials or the Gen Zs or the Gen Alphas that, are growing up now are just like, they're able to sort of sift through it for the, maybe not all of them, obviously, this is an absolute thing, but the vast majority of them are able to sift through it and are like, something's not quite right here.
Or they just at least expect that there is some misinformation out there. Like, they know going into it, there's going to be some things I see on here that aren't true. It's the internet. Anyone can post anything they want.
There's a reason that Facebook is probably the biggest news source for a lot of baby boomers out there.
Yep.
So what I want to do now is I want to get into sort of like the other side of discussion. I know like we picked on baby boomers a lot in that first half, but I do want to discuss like what are some of the things that, maybe the baby boomers have a point. Maybe they're like sort of, they're onto something here about the millennial generation. So like I have to say, and I should have said this at the top of the show, I don't wear this. Like, I am not like, millennial, yeah, let's go. Like, I'm not, like, a lot of these things that I characterize as, like, millennial characteristics are, like, thought about in hindsight. Like, I don't go to, like, get my, I don't know, avocado toast or whatever. I'm like, I'm doing this because I'm a millennial. I sort of, like, think about it in hindsight and be like, no, that was pretty, like, what you said about
I love avocado toast.
No, but, like, like, I don't have these persuasions because I'm a millennial.
Of course, it's not conscious. Yeah. It's just a product of the fact that that's the time you grew up in.
Right. Like, I never give the reason, like, if someone's like, why do you do it that way? I've never said, well, because I'm a millennial. I've just...
But then when you think about it, you're like, oh, well, that's kind of a millennial thing to do. Yeah. That makes sense.
In contrast and in hindsight only.
Right. Yeah. You know what I mean? If you think about it or it's posed to you. Yeah.
So what are the things that you think like that the baby boomers have a point on? Do you want me to start?
I already touched on mine earlier, but go ahead.
So the value of like hand to earth hard work, like there is a lot of truth to the notion that I do think a good portion of baby boomers have an excellent work ethic. They really do. And like these are individuals that have stayed in the same field for decades and they're super, super loyal to their to the industry that they work in, or maybe even the company that they work for. And I think that's a difference. You see like the fluidity with millennials being like, oh, this is just sort of like a start-off thing. This is just sort of like where I want to get my feet wet for a couple on the whole. Like a lot of millennials don't stay in the same position or the same company. They like to move around and get experience elsewhere.
That's true, but I think that's because that's advantageous to your career. Like it's required. You need this diversity of experience, and the qualifications are set to that standard, and it's just a function of the modern job industry. But I think that in general, not to say that there were never boomers who worked for companies that they believed in and were passionate about, but I do think millennials are, and the younger generations are more likely to, yes, they want to make a paycheck and support themselves and their families, but they really want to do something that they're passionate about and make a difference in the world. So I think from that sense, I think if they find a company that fits that and they feel strongly, like they're very likely to stay. But I understand what you're saying about also being like having that entrepreneurial like mindset and moving around and traveling and stuff like that's also like a very millennial stereotype.
Well, I feel like baby boomers will stay in the same job and be like committed to a company even if they hate their job.
Yes.
Like you hear that a lot. Like I don't want to name names, but we talk to older people like about, when they were working. Some of them are retired now, but when they were working, they're like, I hate where I work, but I have to do it to support my family, which is to me admirable. Like I do admire that sort of sacrifice, and of course you have to do everything you can to take care of your family. That goes without saying. But I do feel like you're right. There's more of a drive to have like passion projects or to be like not just committed to your job, but love your job. When it comes to millennials, because I do think, again, not to point fingers at the baby boomers and saying this is your fault, but, at least when I was younger, and I think this is sort of like common for people our age, and I'm sure your parents did the same thing, and, a lot of the listeners here, if you're a millennial, your parents probably said the same thing, and maybe for the reason why they were so miserable in their job. But like my parents would always say, you can be anything. You can do anything. Like just do it. And like you have that small window of opportunity where you become like sort of nothing as a child. Like you're nothing but potential. You are absolutely nothing but potential, which is amazing. And like you had that small window of opportunity to actually activate that potential and become something. The lucky ones are able to do that. But now because of how kind of shitty the job market is and how expensive college is, like a lot of millennials don't really have that opportunity to become anything they want. And that's why they had this sort of gripe against the world and be like, hey, like I got this degree. Oh, you need a master's degree. All of a sudden that's not enough anymore. And I'm drowning in student debt. I can't be what I'm passionate about. So I think like when you see that, yes, baby boomers have that commitment to their job, and I think that bleeds over to other areas of their life, which is great. But millennials, I also think like they're very crafty in these startup projects. Like you see things like podcasts, you see things like YouTube shows, you see things like mail-in services and stuff like Dollar Shave Club and stuff. You can sponsor us if you want, Dollar Shave Club. But like all these like mail-in services, these are all millennial byproducts.
Just as long as it's not an MLM.
Yeah. These are all millennial byproducts, and it's something that is advantageous. So I think like when millennials, they focus that frustration elsewhere, they become crafty. And I think that's like the void that the baby boomers maybe not as a whole activated because they didn't have to. They had a job that it was just a job, but they were able to provide for their family, and that was the most important thing.
Right. In most cases, they were able to find something.
Not to say that providing for your family today isn't important. It most certainly is. But I do think millennials now, especially those that have kids, are looking for something else to fill in their like personal thing. Like I think that's something that is also different from the baby boomers, is that maybe they didn't have that personal project that they were passionate about. Whereas like for you, for instance, you're lucky that your job is your passion.
Right.
But
right.
for me, my job certainly isn't my passion, so I do this.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
like,
yeah.
To sort of fill that void.
Right.
Even though I'm very much happy with our family dynamic and having a child and stuff.
Right.
I always had that little extra that like I need to express myself. And I don't think that's unique amongst millennials. I think that's like pretty pervasive.
Yeah. I think I'm just getting a little bit distracted in this conversation just because of, what we touched on at the top of the show of I just again want to acknowledge that it's not just a generational thing that might, lend itself to people having a hard time following their passion or getting a job to support their family and things like that. There's a lot of other factors to consider with, marginalized communities and things like that. And the structure of things that kind of don't allow people to get where they want to go. Like when you said about kids having nothing but potential and all that, it's just, so like, I just can't quite separate myself from what we talked about in the beginning.
Even if we can touch on that from the beginning, like you don't have, like, it's obviously like it's in terms, I say better, not as a class thing. I say better when it comes to like a good quality podcast. It's easier and better for the listening experience, quote unquote. Right. And so if you are in these underprivileged communities and stuff, you can still have the ability to make a podcast. All you need is your phone. Like you can still do it. Those opportunities are still available.
Sure. To find creative outlets and all that. But different people have different resources available to them and all that. That's all that I was getting distracted because that thought was eating in the back of my mind.
Of course. No. I'm not, I don't discount that. I'm just saying those sort of opportunities, even for the lesser privileged, are still there.
Yes, it's just harder.
It's harder, right? Yeah. Whereas like if you were lesser privileged in the boomer generation, no fucking way you're going to have anything close to that type of opportunity to be heard.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. I guess we've made some progress from that perspective, but yeah.
Anyways, so like sticking with the topic though, like when it comes to like commitment, I do think that is something you and I think can relate to personally, like the whole marriage thing now. Like millennial generation, they're not, really getting married. And if they are, it's sort of later. And again, I do think there are a lot of financial factors that are preventing millennials from getting married around the same time that the boomers were. So like it's pretty, I don't know. I don't think it was uncommon for people to be married in their early 20s within the boomer generation.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what we were talking about with education, is because it wasn't a given that you were going to go to a 4-year college or at least try to. Like that expectation wasn't just like automatically there.
You
like
could have
I think
a
it is now
good
for a lot of
job
kids.
with a high school education.
Right. And so you could get married right out of high school and start a family and buy a house and have a 9-to-5 and only one person in the house. You could be on a single family, a single income and support a family.
Right.
Like that's just the way the economics were at the time.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Like it reminds me of the Everybody Loves Raymond episode where Marie and Frank were moving out and they were going to sell their son the house. They're like, we'll sell it to you the price we paid, $30,000.
Yeah.
It's like, and to them, it's just like, we're buying a house for $30,000. And to like the I guess the boomers, that then they might be even like the silent generation, but still they were like, that's a lot of money to pay for
well,
a
they
house.
were like, we're not just going to give it to you.
Yeah,
like you got to pay.
Like
but that's like nothing for a house.
It's like what you paid, not what it's worth. Right.
Exactly.
And so like when you compare like the housing market, like this is what frustrates me is like, why don't you guys just get a house? Like, well, dude, like when you bought a house, how much, like when you just got out of your pedagogy and you were ready to start with the world, houses at most were like $100,000. Like,
yeah, depending on where you live, but still, it was
like now we bought a pretty modest house for over $200,000 and like obviously,
and it was a struggle to find even this.
Right. Yeah. And we live in the Northeast, so depending on where you live, it's like, oh, that's a deal, or oh, that's a lot. Like so everything obviously is relative in that respect, but still like there's that frustration of trying to break through the ceiling that I don't necessarily think the baby boomers understand, because yes, they had plenty of opportunities, but those opportunities to excel, I think, were more available. I just went on a tangent, so let me get back to the marriage thing. So like I do admire their commitment to staying with the same person and valuing that family dynamic that, although it's not like represented on paper with millennials, I do think it's a little bit more out in the open for baby boomers, like the whole family aspect.
Right. And I think that also connects to the concept of community and the value of community. Like when they would work for a certain company for their whole lives and there was this loyalty, and like I feel like if it was a relatively small company that was treated as sort of a family, a community,
Right.
whatever, and you supported all these other local businesses and there was that sense of community. I know we've talked about this before, and I think this is something where I am like fall more into the stereotypical like boomer attitude
You're an
about
old
it.
soul about it.
I am. Yeah. Like it makes me sad that there's not that, like at least where we are, I don't feel that sense of community. And we've been living here for like 3 years and we barely know the names of our two neighbors who live on either side of us. And we're in a pretty condensed, like it's a suburban neighborhood, but they're like right there. Like we see them all the time. And like, we don't know anyone else really in our neighborhood. And we only just met the person who lives behind us like a week ago because we have to replace the fence and it actually belongs to them. So like, but before that, we never even talked to them. And it's just sad to me. And I remember when we moved in, I talked about like making cookies or something to go and like introduce ourselves to the neighbors. And like, I was all like, leave it to Beaver about it. And everybody else, all my friends and you, Adam, were like, that's fucking weird. Like, that's
and then
so
your
creepy.
identity took over. Like,
and then,
I see these memes of my waiver just waved hi to me. Time to move.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I
Yeah, but especially now, like during the pandemic, I think about like how like it would be fun if we could like grill on the, because we can see like each other's decks and backyards, like if we are out on our deck and like if we would like grill and play music and like socially distance, like interact with our neighbors, like I'm like that would be kind of cool. But we just don't have that kind of relationship, and I feel like that's really common with our generation, is that that's not a thing to like get to know your neighbors. And I don't really know what that's a function of, but it's definitely an observation that I've made.
It's true. Like town halls, committees and shit like that. That's a very baby boomer thing.
Oh yeah, but that's still a thing. That's something I thought about joining one of our town committees before the well, it's because I have that idea about the community garden thing and the
But then again, there you go, pursuing a passion project.
Yeah, I suppose.
You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't always have to be
But it's also
a digital.
just want to do something for our community.
Sure.
Like,
but that's a passion of yours. Like you're pursuing that.
But
I don't necessarily
also
think that was there.
I have the privilege of having, you know, the time. Well, I don't have a lot of time to spare, but I feel like I could make the time to do something like that.
It's kind of like when we talk about city halls, like for the town that we live in, there was, I don't know how prevalent it is right now, but there was a sort of an issue when it came to the sewer system.
Oh, it's still happening. Yeah.
Sure, but like I think it's been put on the back burner, or at least it's been put on pause. And like everyone's like, go to a city hall meeting. Like a coworker of mine who lives in the same town was like, are you going to the meeting? I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And he's like, there's a town hall meeting. Didn't you get the local paper? I'm like, and those free things that we get. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, the reminder.
Coventry Reminder. And I'm like, I don't read that. Like literally I get it in the mail. I throw it away. He's like, oh, you need to go to get your voice heard. I'm like, and thinking, if it was a Zoom meeting, I'd do it. Like but like you think about like it, those opportunities, I feel like, and this is again going back to being a millennial and stuff, like first of all they don't interest me, and maybe that is like a byproduct, a negative byproduct.
What doesn't interest you?
Like going into these like city council meetings,
right? But if there's an issue on the agenda that directly affects you or that you do care about, then you should consider going.
I think it's very millennial of me, and this is like where boomers will call me lazy, and I'll be like, it will get figured out.
Yeah, you're like, well, that's the entitled, or like you're just relying on other people to figure it out
I'm
for you.
I'm relying on the boomers to do it because they do.
I know, and I know that's not okay. We should be.
It's
more
like
involved.
they get ready. They're like, we got to pack our movie candy for this one because we're going to a fucking city council meeting.
Well, there's also some other logistical things. Like it might be easier for people in that generation who have kids who are grown up and out of the house, or they're retired or whatever, and they do legitimately have the time to go and like research the issue and go to the meetings and all that. And it depends on, you know, these meetings are like on a weeknight at 6:30 or 7 o'clock. That's bedtime. Like I'm trying to get. We both work full time, trying to get dinner on the table, get her to bed, whatever. And, you know, parents are busy running their kids to sports and, you know, outside of the pandemic, doing all that kind of stuff. So I do think there's some connection there. It's just like based on where you are in your life that you have more space in your brain to like put in the energy to figure that kind of stuff out. But it's important. It does affect us directly and our community, and it's important to try to be involved. But that is a super millennial stance. 100%. Yeah.
Schweppes, by the way. Schweppes sparkling orange seltzer. But no, boomers love the committees. They love the neighborly aspect. And I do think maybe it's a bad thing. And maybe, again, I consider, when you get to know me, I'm pretty extroverted. I have to be in order to be in a podcast platform. But if you didn't listen to the show or didn't know me beforehand and I was just introduced to you, I'm probably like, stay away. Like, I don't necessarily like meeting new people in a I don't want to say a forced way, but like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not forced. It's more of like, I'm obligated to meet you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm obligated to have to talk and introduce myself to my neighbors. I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I get that.
It's just like disingenuous. It's like, I have to introduce myself, not because I really want to talk to you, but because you're my neighbor and like we have to share this living space together.
Yeah, but like that's not, even that. I'm like, or we have the opportunity to have a good relationship with our neighbors and maybe make good friends out of it. Like, who knows?
I don't have time for new
I know,
friends.
I get it. I know we don't. But they're right there.
I can't. But I don't want to talk to you. Like, please. Like, I apologize if you accidentally or you're stalking us and you're listening to the show. I don't want to talk to you. Like, just I will help you out when you need it if you ask. But don't ask. No, I'm just kidding.
It's so funny how millennials are more social on social media than we are in person for the most part. Like, I think that's maybe that's one of the big differences as to why the whole community neighborly thing was, more of a thing for older generations, and that's something I think that they do have a point of, of not discrediting, but like, what's the word I'm looking for?
I hear what you're saying. Like the whole social
a negative.
aspect,
I don't want to say, but like, yeah, something that they can kind of point out that millennials do that. We rely on social media to socialize, and we're not as comfortable talking with people in person or even talking to people on the phone. Like, that's a millennial thing too. Don't call me, just text me.
Yeah, for like social media will most certainly be like the black eye of this generation. Like, it will definitely be like something that I think, although still utilized in some fashion for the generations that come after us, they'll look back at it and be like, what were they thinking? Like with MySpace and even LiveJournal and shit like that, like AOL profiles and AIM and stuff, like all these incremental things leading up to the Facebook boom. And again, boomers, you love your Facebook. You're welcome. But like when it comes to that sort of aspect, I can see merit towards that and why the boomers have such a disdain towards millennials for that, because, eye contact, and I'm looking in the eye, is sort of like gone. And I value when I'm talking to someone, especially brand new, looking at them in the eye and being like, only because I'm trying to figure them out, really. But at the same time, it tells me what kind of a person you are if you look at me in the eye and you're talking to me. I am guilty of this. I hate talking to people on the phone. I actively look for reasons not to do it.
Even if it's like making a doctor's appointment or like ordering a pizza.
I actively don't want to do it. Maybe for pizza because it's food, but like, like talking, like making appointments or getting quotes for stuff. I'm just like, I don't want to do that. And
it's
I'd
like,
rather
can we request
email.
a quote online?
Yeah. And I've referenced this on a previous show. If someone calls me, that's a friend of mine, I'm like, something's wrong.
Right. That's what I mean. Millennials don't talk on the phone unless it's necessary.
If my mom calls me, I don't necessarily think something's wrong or something. Or if your dad calls you or something, like that's just what that generation
does.
does.
Now we FaceTime a lot so that they can talk to our daughter.
But if my friend, my peer calls me, there's something wrong or there's a discussion that needs to be had.
It's like urgent or like really important.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. And so like I do understand that aspect. Again, like sort of like mail writing and stuff, like I do think there's value to that, like writing letters to someone. That's a lost art. I feel like because email is there and it's it's free, you don't have to buy stamps, but like
but there is something about I have a friend who recently sent out she had like a bunch of old postcards from all these random trips that she had taken, and she just randomly writes postcards to her friends sometimes, and it's really like heartwarming, and it's like special.
It's a lost art. It really is.
It's really nice to have a handwritten note.
You get them so infrequently.
Right.
And when you do get them, you're like, oh, this is special.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, it does have like, absence does make the heart grow fonder in that respect, but still, like, I do think there's a lost art to that, the communication, the sort of, I don't want to say antiquated, but like the person to person interaction. I do feel though that is sort of finding or resurfacing in a way with the generations that are coming after us. They're a little bit more thirsty for the face-to-face, person-to-person.
But after the pandemic, everyone will be. I think it's
for sure.
Certainly highlighted the value of social interaction in person, and people miss it. And I think maybe that it will be more valued when we can do it again.
Yeah, I just, you see it. And, although I've never really actively made my political thoughts here, like I've never declared them, and we'll save that for November, but like even like having not a tribe, I don't want to say that, but like these belief systems set up, you sort of believe that your entire life as a millennial. I feel like you have your sort of ethics aligned, whereas I feel like the boomers they're a little bit more fluid with things as time goes on. Maybe not the serious issues, but you figure these people that grew up in the 60s, a lot of them don't have those like hippie values now. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't.
Well, maybe.
You know what I mean? Like that sort of like Rage Against the Machine aspect, not the band, but the concept of it isn't really there. Maybe that just comes with getting older. Your aggression sort of fades,
or the issues that they were upset about aren't really directly affecting them anymore.
Although they're still there.
Right. Yeah. I don't really know.
To wrap a bow on this, is there anything that you want to say further about the divide of these generations? Because I do feel like this is a phenomenon that is sort of, I don't know, I don't see it anywhere else. I've never really heard about it anywhere.
You mean it
else.
Being specific to boomers and millennials?
Yeah. Like I've never, maybe like the hippies versus the period before them, I guess that would be the silent generation.
Right.
Maybe that's there, and like that is in history books.
Yeah.
I don't know that necessarily this type of generational divide or culture war or whatever, quote unquote, will necessarily be in the history books. Maybe it will, but for me, like it's a pretty substantial divide. Is there anything else you want to say about it?
I just think it's going to keep happening. The more, I think it is linked a lot to the technology thing that we talked about, and it just keeps accelerating faster and faster with each generation. And so I think we are totally going to be in the kids these days attitude, like that. We think how boomers view us as millennials. I think we will 100% also view the next generation in the same light. And we can try to not let it get too far, but it's going to be the same.
You can talk about millennials and their non-existing participation trophies and our I don't know, our obsessions and our offenses. We're always offended. At least we didn't chew on Tide Pods. That's not us.
No, that's not us.
Those are the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
Okay? Not us.
Yeah.
Millennials weren't chewing Tide Pods. The last thing I want to say is, like, I do value the generations that have come before us. Every single generation has their unique characteristics, and every single generation has something of value to pass on. They really do. And like, whether those are family values, whether those are social values, like looking at someone in the eye, that's sort of like, again, lost. The little things like writing letters and mailing them out, like Christmas cards and stuff, like sort of a lost art now.
Yeah.
People are just like writing on people's Facebooks instead of sending cards. Like to me, like there are some things that the previous generation before us still they do that we could learn from.
Yeah.
Having said that, there are things that millennials do that the baby boomers, or the things that the millennials have invented and done, the baby boomers are now enjoying, but still shitting on the things that they enjoy. Right? So like they hate like social media, but they love talking about stuff on social media, and they love getting their news on social media.
Or just complaining about millennials always being on their phones, attached to their phones. But we know plenty of people in the baby boomer generation who do the same thing.
Yeah, you love your smartphones. And like, again, like maybe that's something that we collectively need to work on rather than just a single demographic.
Not just one generation. Yeah.
But next time you get mad at a millennial, remember, you probably clicked on a pop-up today, and we probably have to remove a virus from your computer. Okay? So that will wrap it up today. If you liked what you heard and you're a boomer, please don't leave us a 1-star review. Just don't even do anything. Like, just unsubscribe. But if you're a millennial and you're like, Team Millennial, you know, I don't even want to say you'll know what to do, but maybe you don't understand if you're a baby boomer. But like, if you're a millennial, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We're also on a bunch of other podcast platforms. We're on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Spotify. That's the one I always get tongue-tied on. Castbox. We're on all of the platforms that you want to get your podcast fix from. If you want to follow us on your socials, we're on Twitter at She's Napping Pod, a little inactive there compared to the Facebook. Boomers, there you go. We're on Facebook.com/While She's Napping. Cindy is the main moderator there, and you're doing a really good job. Really solid. I couldn't do it.
Thanks.
There are a lot of times where I'm like, how do you schedule a post? That's the boomer in me. I don't know what to do.
It's true. I felt so cool telling you how to do that.
I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make a poll. I know how to do it on Twitter. I don't know how to do it on Facebook.
Teamwork.
Cindy got what she wanted. She opened up an Instagram. We should say that too.
That's right.
While She's Napping on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And if you want to email us,
whileshe'snapping@gmail.com.
No stamps. You don't need a stamp. Just an email account. Send away. But yeah, next week, do you want to do the 90s?
That'd be fun.
Yeah. It sort of coincides. It's a nice, like, post-millennial boomer.
Yeah. So now, as millennials, we can really reflect on what it was like to grow up in the 90s.
Yeah. So, hey, if you grew up in the 90s or you're a fan of the 90s, let us know on Facebook. What's your favorite thing about the 90s? It could be anything pop culture related, food related, anything you want. Mm-hmm. Leave it on the Facebook and we'll talk about it. It's sort of like a different version of the Rhode Island episode, except we'll be highlighting the 90s and stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's cool.
All right. So until next time, take it easy, guys.
See ya.